The IP ownership piece is going to be really important, right? So depending on if you're a brand, some brands are okay with, the influencer owning it and some aren't. So you really got to understand who's going to own that.
Mm-hmm.
Also, if, for example, if a brand gets a letter from the FTC because you didn't disclose properly, who's liable for that? The other thing too is to think about, if an influencer posts something on their page and it's right next to your content, do you have the right to ask them to take it down? That particular provision is called what we know as a morals clause. So athletes have this in their contracts, a lot of entertainers. So you'll see it a lot. Like if an athlete says something controversial or does something controversial, they may just get cut from the team or they
Mm-hmm.
may get fired. A lot of that is because of a morals clause in their contract that basically says if you do certain types of behavior, we have the right to terminate the contract. And
Right.
so you'll also see that in influencer marketing contracts also.
You're listening to the Black to Business Podcast, an educational podcast providing Black entrepreneurs with the tools and resources to start and grow their businesses. We chat with vetted Black entrepreneurs, thought leaders, and business owners as they provide tips and resources to help take your business to the next level. I'm your host, Monique T. Marshall. Hey there, and welcome back to the Black to Business Podcast. I'm your host, Monique T. Marshall, and today we're diving straight into a legal topic that's crucial in today's digital age. I know, right? You gotta love it. We are talking all about protecting your brand in the influencer landscape. You see, in this digital age that we're in, entrepreneurs like you and me are navigating a landscape that's evolving faster than ever before. Your brand, your vision, your community, they are your life's work. But how do you ensure that they are protected and resilient in the face of the ever-changing influencer landscape? Joining us today is Bobby Robertson, a seasoned expert at the crossroads of law, technology, and entrepreneurship. With over 15 years of experience, Bobby has seen it all. He's built multi-million-dollar ventures, advised creatives, athletes, and celebrities on brand scaling and protection. And today, he's here to unravel the secrets of protecting your brand in the influencer landscape. This topic is so important because your brand is your legacy. It's what you've poured your sweat, your tears, and your dreams into. And now you're facing a digital world where brand protection is more vital than ever. Entrepreneurs like you and me are grappling with these questions and challenges from content creation to contract negotiations. So today we got you because you are going to learn how to view your influence as a business opportunity and not just a personal pursuit. We're going to talk about strategies for protecting your brand's integrity and intellectual property in the influencer landscape. We're also going to talk about crucial considerations when collaborating with brands and influencers, from setting expectations to negotiation, legal essentials, and so much more. So let's dive in. Actually, before we jump into the episode, I have an exciting announcement to share with you. During the month of September, we are continuing our very popular Black Men Who Lead campaign and featuring some amazing Black businessmen on the podcast all month. We're also doing the same on our dedicated Instagram account at Black Men Who Lead, so make sure that you are following. In addition to this, we are taking our Black Men Who Lead panel on the road and we are heading to Washington, D.C. on September 21st. We would love for you to join us if you're in the area as we conclude this year's topic on the DNA of a Black businessman. The Big Boss energy will be in the building, and this is a conversation that you don't want to miss. All things related to Black Men Who Lead and information about how to RSVP can be found at www.blackmenwholead.com. Okay, now back into the episode. Bobby, welcome to the Black to Business Podcast. I'm so excited to have you here, so welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me, Monique.
Of course. So before we dive into today's topic, I would love for you to share a little bit about yourself with my guest. With my audience, if you could share a little bit about your background, what is it that you do and how did you get started?
Yeah, most definitely. So everyone knows me as the influencer attorney. So I am a business and intellectual property attorney. And I help entrepreneurs of all sizes with a variety of different corporate and IP matters. So whether it's business formation, contracts, on the IP side, it's trademarks, copyrights, and licensing. And I represent athletes, entertainers, startups, you name it. I also do coaching and consulting, helping them connect their legal and business dots to help them scale beyond seven figures.
Love that. And so I'm excited about today's topic, which is all about how people can protect their brands in the influencer landscape. And I think I'm so excited because of the way business is going now, moving towards this influencer landscape. So I first want to dive into understanding the influencer landscape. So could you start by giving us an overview of the influencer landscape and how it has transformed now, like I said, into a legitimate business avenue?
Most definitely. So, COVID gave us a lot of things, right?
Mm-hmm.
And before traditional advertising, as you know, Monique, it was just advertising on TV,
Mm-hmm.
billboards, radio, things of that nature. And I mean, influencer marketing was a thing, but it was more of a celebrity thing on
Yeah.
social media. But I think during COVID, that changed because we were all locked in creating content. And
Yeah.
brands started to really pay attention to the authentic communities that a lot of content creators were creating. And the return on investment was a lot more extensive than a radio ad or a commercial because they're advertising to people who will likely never buy their product. But if you get
Mm-hmm.
a fashion influencer, that brand knows that audience will likely convert higher than a TV ad. So you started to see a lot of dollars shift from traditional media to hiring nano influencers, micro influencers, really to push their brands in a meaningful way. And I think everybody continues to win from it. And I don't think it's going to change for a while.
For a while. You said it's not going to change. All right. So with that, yeah, I definitely agree with you. And I know a lot of people who are listening are thinking about, especially emerging entrepreneurs or just getting
Yeah,
started, how
right.
they can get into this lane. So for many who are considering being influencers, how would you advise them to approach this as a business rather than just a personal pursuit?
Yeah, I think it's important. And I represent a lot of influencers. And it's really important to know why you're getting into this space, and it can't just be
Mm-hmm.
for money, right?
Yes.
It can't be for money. And it's also important to know that this is more about community.
Mm-hmm.
I used to I'm going to be honest, I used to give the side eye when people be like, oh, it's about community, community, community. But legitimately, that's what it's about,
Mm-hmm.
because your community is going to socialize your brand even when you're not posting, even when you're not
Mm-hmm.
really doing anything. They're your brand ambassadors beyond yourself. And so if you're going to get into it, have pure intentions to really add a tremendous amount of value to your community, and brands will appreciate it. And I think the sustainability of your brand relationships will be a lot better than someone
Mm-hmm.
who doesn't really focus on cultivating community.
Totally agree. I agree, community. And Bobby,
Yeah.
in your experience, what are some of the often overlooked aspects that entrepreneurs should consider when they're building their brand in the influencer space? And I would love for you to share any specific challenges unique to Black entrepreneurs in this regard.
No, facts. I appreciate that question. Really good question. So I think you alluded to it earlier, Monique, is that a lot of influencers don't see themselves as a business.
Mm-hmm.
And that's very, very problematic. So I always tell entrepreneurs and even influencers, you got to form your LLC. You got to have a bank account. You got to make sure you have contracts. You got to trademark your name and your brand and all these things, right? You really have to take yourself serious when it comes to how you're representing a brand, because you're basically an extension of that brand. And if they believe that you're not a serious entrepreneur, they're not going to want to continue to do business with you. They may give you a shot, but
Right.
the reality is you want that to be consistent money, not one-off transactions. And one of the ways you demonstrate that you are a legitimate business, when they send you a contract, you're not putting it in your personal name, or when they ask for your EIN, you don't have one, so you got to give them your social security number. It's just a lot of little things that brands pick up on
Mm-hmm.
that lets them know that you're not ready to do business. And so you got to be ready to do business, especially if you're going to do business with big brands.
Mm. Great advice. And you mentioned the need to protect influence as a business. Could you elaborate on what this actually entails and what are some of the like legal and strategic steps that entrepreneurs need to take to safeguard their brands?
Yeah, facts. Great question. So, the most important thing is, again, you are a brand. And so obviously, we protect the brand a couple of different ways. I mentioned earlier about business formation, right? You have
Yes.
to protect yourself from a liability perspective. So that's the first way you protect yourself is by making sure you have a business entity. The second way is making sure that when you do sign a contract with a brand, that you pay attention to the IP language in the contract. So, for example, some brands, and I represent brands too, will want to own the content. So even if you hired the videographer, even if you hired the photographer, they still may want to own the content at the end of the day. And you may not want that. So it's important to know if they do own it, are they going to give you a license because your image is on it, right? Your face and everything else is represented on that piece of brand asset. So then that's something you just need to pay attention to. And if you have a very unique brand, you definitely want to trademark it because you don't want somebody else copying you, coming up with a similar brand or a name, and then you really don't have anything or any recourse against them because you didn't protect it.
Yes, yes, yes. And also we spoke about how a lot of it is sharing content. So now I want to talk about how to protect that content that people are creating. So how do they protect their intellectual property and ensure that their online content isn't misused by others?
No, yeah, again, and you may think I'm like hammering home these points. It's because I am, right?
It's all good.
So definitely, before, even if you're like not working with a brand and you're just creating content on your own, just for your own community and for your own page, it's really important. Like if you're working with a photographer or videographer, to make sure that you own that content. And one of the ways you make sure you own it is through like a work for hire agreement. And that agreement simply just says, hey, I'm hiring you to take these photos. And at the end of the day, you're going to assign and transfer ownership to me, right? Because copyright law says whoever creates the thing owns the thing. That's a very simplistic way of putting it. But so, for example, if a photographer takes the picture, they created it. So that means they own the copyright. So in order to make sure you own it, you got to contractually assign that thing to you. And that happens a lot because a lot of photographers, for not picking on photographers, I love photographers and videographers. They make the world go round on the content side. But some of them will give you a license to use the images if you're not careful with the language in your contract. So that's one way to protect it. And then the other way, again, is making sure you have the right contract language to say that you own the content at the end of the day.
I love that. I love that scenario. And I also want to ask now, sometimes I see like when someone takes a headshot of someone and say it goes into New York Times and then they give credit to the photographer. Is that necessary or is that a case where, so say they signed that agreement, like how does that work?
Yeah, so you definitely want to. So if I took a image of a professional, I took your photo, and then the New York Times wants to do a profile on you and your podcast, and they ask for an image of you, right? If I provide the image and I don't have your permission or consent, then typically, and I do a lot of these media releases, the New York Times is going to want to know, do they have permission to use that image? And so sometimes they will ask for permission either directly from the person who's photographed or the person or the publicist who's bringing that story to them. So a lot of these publications will make sure that they have permission from somebody who's authorized to give it to them.
Right.
Otherwise, they will likely won't publish the story.
Good to know. And then a lot of people in the audience are they're service providers. And so they're sharing content online. Maybe it might be 10 tips to do this, or you should do trademarking this way. When it comes to sharing content on social media, is it in someone's best interest to put a disclaimer, or they don't have to?
Yeah, so it's interesting you mentioned disclaimers. It should be important. Like, so for example, I represent like, a lot of coaches and consultants, and
Mm-hmm.
people will make like, for example, like earnings claims, like, oh, if you do this, you can make X or make
Yeah.
X, and you know what I mean? And it's important to do an earnings disclaimer because, you can have two people, but you got two different mindsets and hustles and how they want to approach it. So one
Right.
may win, the other one may not. And then you find yourself in trouble because you didn't put a disclaimer out there. And so earnings disclaimers are important. Health, anytime they're making like health claims, I get this a lot with supplement companies or fitness companies
Mm-hmm.
and things of that nature. So we're always evaluating like the claims you make, especially if somebody relies on it to make a purchasing decision. So that is important to just kind of be mindful of
Mm-hmm.
as well. So yeah, so making the appropriate disclaimers is necessary, but it's not always necessary. One instance that it's really necessary in the influencer marketing space is when you are endorsing a product. So
Mm-hmm.
there are requirements, and you probably see it too, like on IG or whatever platform. It's like hashtag ad or hashtag sponsored
Yeah.
brand or brand ambassador. Those are federal requirements. So that Federal Trade Commission, FTC, governs advertising, and they consider sponsorship posts or sponsored posts as a form of advertising. And the idea is that me and you as consumers and your audience should know if we're getting pushed an ad, basically.
Right.
And so the way that you're supposed to let us know is that you're supposed to disclose that to us. And there are strict disclosure requirements. So if you are an influencer marketing, and I see it all the time, a lot of influencers follow me and I'll see them pushing a brand and then I'll just DM them. I'm like, I don't see your disclosure. And then they'll go back and edit the post or whatever. And some of them don't want to edit it because they're worried about their engagement.
Mm.
And so sometimes, it's important that you have to know if you're going to get into the space. And the FTC has a really good, easy influencer disclosure guide. So like if you Google FTC social media disclosure or influence marketing disclosure, it's like a 2-pager. It's really, really simple, and it talks you through how to make the disclosures the right way so you don't get in trouble.
That is certainly good to know. That's good information. See, this is what we get on the
Yeah.
Black to Business podcast. Thank you for that, Bobby.
I got you. I got you.
Yes, I love it. So we kind of touched on it a little bit earlier. I want to talk about the navigating the influencer and the business relationship. So a lot of people are getting to collaborating with brands and influencers. What are some of those key considerations they should keep in mind when entering into a partnership to make sure that both interests are protected?
I love talking to hosts that lead me into really, really great answers. So,
Mm-hmm.
the one thing to your point is it's a partnership. I
Mm-hmm.
notice, especially when like newer influencers, they just looking at the money, right? They
Yeah.
just like, oh my gosh, I'm gonna get the bag, right? But it's
Mm-hmm.
like there's more where that came from, and then the reality is a lot of these folks that work in influence marketing at these companies or agencies, they talk to their friends at other agencies, and so you don't want to develop a reputation of someone who doesn't do good work or is only about money or complains a lot or whatever the issue may be. So just treat it as a partnership and try to figure out how you can be a really good partner to them.
Mm-hmm.
Some of the best influencers I know, they basically help shape campaigns for brands, and they're not even looking at this quarter. They're like 4 or 5 quarters ahead, trying to
Mm.
help brands really think about how they can position themselves to help them kind of execute on their sales strategy. And so when you start thinking about, right now we're about to go into the holiday season, but some influencers are already talking about brands for the spring campaign of next year, right?
Mm-hmm.
So how do you start getting yourself in position to show them that you're actually thinking ahead with their best interests in mind, not just yours?
Mm. Great advice. And Bobby, you work with creatives, entrepreneurs, athletes, celebrities. And from your experience, what are some of the common misunderstandings or unrealistic expectation that business owners may have when working with influencers? And how can they set these clear expectations for a successful collaboration?
Yeah, I think the biggest sort of mistake is, well, we got to first step back and figure out why you want to work with an influencer,
Mm-hmm.
right? Like what do you expect from it? Um, how do you think it's going to work? Have you spoken to other companies that are similar to yours that may have done it? But really understand why you want to do it. But once you understand why you want to do it,
Mm-hmm.
I think the biggest thing that I see a lot of like newer companies, they some of them, not all of them, but some of them sort of approach it very half-hearted in the sense of, well, I'll just give you a free product, or I'll just give you something of it's of value, but it's not money, right? Well, I'll
Mm-hmm.
just give you discounts, or I'll give you a free stay or something like that if you're a hotel or whatnot. And depending on the type of hotel, a free stay may be cool for a weekend and whatnot, and you can shoot content there and all that. And that happens a lot too. But I like to say, if you're going to treat your influencer marketing dollars like you would any other advertising dollars,
Mm-hmm.
and if you would pay to put your stuff on radio, then you should still try to pay that influencer the same rate or a different rate that makes sense for you, that will give you the return on investment. But I just see a lot of newer companies specifically try to just rely on free products or some other freebie. And sometimes that works, and sometimes a lot of influencers may get offended by that.
Mm-hmm. I can definitely see that happening. Now, on the flip side, how can influencers ensure that they are treated professionally by these brands and these businesses that they're collaborating with? And are there any red flags that they should watch out for?
Yeah, I think the biggest one, you got to have your stuff together. So when a
Mm-hmm.
brand approaches you, like, what's your pager? What's your media kit? Do you have a media kit with all your updated numbers and the brands you may have worked for? You may have a contract already for them to sign,
Mm-hmm.
but just really have your packet of stuff ready, including like proposed ideas for that brand. Some red flags would be if a brand doesn't want to sign a contract, red flag. If they
Mm-hmm.
only want to communicate via email or DMs, red flag. Right. So you really just want to make sure, you have your stuff together, but then they're also coming across as someone who really is interested in working with you.
Got it. And so, in addition to that, Bobby, you also negotiate endorsement deals, and this is crucial in any aspect of a business relationship. Could you share some negotiation strategies that entrepreneurs should employ when they're dealing with influencers or brands?
Yeah, most definitely. So you have a couple of different types of endorsement agreements. So you do have endorsements, and that's basically you're just endorsing their product, right? So
Mm-hmm.
if you're representing a vitamin company or a water company, that's an endorsement deal. And your endorsement, you have to make sure you've tried the product, right? Because a lot of
Mm-hmm.
times people will endorse a product they ain't never tried before. So you definitely want to do that, because then you'd be making false claims about your endorsement. So we don't want to do that.
Right.
But then to your point, a lot of the endorsements, you want to make sure. For example, we have language like non-compete or exclusivity language, and that basically says you can't work with a similar company. And sometimes they'll say you can't work in the fitness with any other fitness brands, right? And sometimes that's pretty aggressive. So
Mm-hmm.
you want to be clear, like, okay, if I take this deal, is it limiting me from working with another a company? Because what they don't want is you working with their competition. So they're going to try
Mm-hmm.
to limit you in a way. And sometimes if they pay you enough, you may say, I'm okay with that. But if they're not really trying to pay you and the exclusivity provision is very aggressive, then you just got to try to renegotiate it. Same with payment. Like if they're trying to pay you, 100 and something days after the campaign is over, that could be problematic, things of that nature. So it's just really thinking about the things you care about. And that's why it's important to have legal counsel or talk to a lawyer often enough to know what to look for when they present these agreements to you.
Yes. All right. Now, you also serve as an advisor. So, in this advisory role, what guidance do you offer to entrepreneurs to make sure that they maintain a strong brand identity while they're accommodating these brands and messaging during collaborations?
Yeah, so my advisory work is really on the strategic side. So
Mm-hmm.
oftentimes I'm trying to help my entrepreneurs think about like, okay, what's next, right? Like, how do
Mm-hmm.
you parlay your influencer brand to something else, whether you want to launch a merch brand or some other type of media company or to do something different.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's important that, you start thinking about just because you started out in influencer marketing doesn't necessarily mean you need to stay there permanently. So I'm really just pushing the vision of my clients to really think more broadly about what they're doing. And sometimes that means me pulling in other clients and other collaborative relationships and brands in some respects to really help them see kind of what the future looks like for them. So if they're making 100,000, but they're trying to get to 500,000 or 750,000 or a million, whatever
Mm-hmm.
the number is, and we just got to figure out what that path is. And that's kind of where advisory comes into play.
Got it. Now let's talk about navigating the legal aspects of brand protection. So, what are some of the foundational legal considerations that entrepreneurs should have in place to safeguard their brand from potential threats?
Yeah, so I like to say every entrepreneur, whether influencer or creative, should have the ABCs of business. So that's like the A is for an attorney, the B
Mm-hmm.
is for a banker, and the C is for a CPA. And I'll tell you why. So, of course, you need other people to help you get your business started and keep running, like social media and PR and operations and systems and all that stuff. But your legal is so foundational. You need somebody to help you on the finance side, make sure you pay your taxes and all that kind of jazz.
Mm-hmm.
And then obviously, depending on how big the influencer is, they may need funding to build out a studio or to do other things. And having a relationship with a banker early is going to be helpful because when you don't need the money, they're willing to give it to you because they know who you are and they know what you've built. So it's important that you start putting a team of advisors, not just lawyers, but other people to kind of
Mm-hmm.
protect your holistic interests. But definitely a lot of the pieces that we talked about earlier, Monique, in terms of like making sure you keep your good records, make sure you form your business and keep it compliant, make sure you don't commingle funds, make
Mm-hmm.
sure you register all your brands. And then we could get super, super sophisticated with it later in terms of like, you get really big and you got 20 trademarks and all this other IP. We can put the IP in different companies. We can do all kind of sophisticated stuff as you get bigger. But at least take care of the basics for right now.
I love that advice. And I love that you said that because I think it could get overwhelming for people. They're like, I need to do all of this. And you're like, okay, get the basics covered. So get those ABCs in order.
That's
Love
right.
that.
That's right. That's right.
So we also have talked about like influence. And of course, this comes with the rise of social media and content creation is at its peak. I want to talk about the legal rights that content creators have over their work and how they can prevent unauthorized use or plagiarism.
Yeah. So the most important thing is to make sure your stuff is registered.
Mm-hmm.
You're going to hear me say that a lot. Now, the beautiful thing with copyrights, though, so things that are copywritten, as I mentioned earlier, whoever create the copyright owns it, right? So copyrights are like your creative expressions that are put what we know in like a tangible medium. So, for example, like a photo is copywritten, a movie, a book,
Mm-hmm.
blogs, a lot of, any type of content where where you're expressing yourself, like writings, poems, things of that nature, cookbooks. You want to make sure when those things are copywritten, they're copywritten automatically. You don't have to file them. But I always say, once you have created something,
Mm-hmm.
go ahead and get it registered. Like, still go file it with the Copyright Office. That way, there's no dispute about who owns it. And if somebody does infringe on your copyright, then you just get a lawyer and we can see, okay, yes, you do own the copyright for this. Let's send them a cease and desist letter, or let's send them something, putting them on notice. that you own this. And then a lot of these platforms like IG, TikTok, Pinterest, Amazon, they have things in place where they will try to help you police the brand, but that's really not what they're in business for. So I always tell my folks to help Amazon help you. So Amazon has, for my clients who sell products on Amazon, they have like a brand protection sort of section, and where you can send them your trademark, and then they'll try to keep counterfeits and other things off their website, or what they call a brand registry. They'll do that on your behalf. It's not perfect, but at least they try to be very intentional about keeping counterfeits off of their website, especially when they know someone has a registered trademark. So those are definitely things every individual should do. And I would caution people to not be so, everybody want to get leapy when it comes to like trying to protect their brand, and they should. But sometimes you got to be very strategic about it, because you can't get too emotional. So I tell people, just slide in a DM, just, tell them you know about it and see if they'll stop. And, if they don't, then you start try to escalate it a little bit more, but don't go straight to a lawyer. Try to resolve it first. And then, if you got to get a lawyer involved, get a lawyer involved. But just knowing you get lawyers involved, people they shut down and don't want to try to cooperate, and it could get expensive for you. So just kind of be thoughtful about it.
That's so good. I remember one time, it was like 3:00 in the morning. I got this LinkedIn message from somebody about Blacks in Business. I'm like, oh my God, I cannot afford a lawyer, but I'm just like creating something, and then they went away. But imagine if I had to, just say I'm going to my lawyer. If I would have gotten nasty.
Yeah, exactly.
And then, so somebody is listening and they're like, where is this copyright office? Because you said copywriting. So any tips on how to start to copyright your material?
Yeah, most definitely. If you want to try to do it on your own, you just go to copyright.gov, and they have some videos on there about how to do it. You just got to pay attention to the videos, because there are different categories of what you can copyright. And the application fees are pretty inexpensive for copyright. My office does copyright as well. And then on the trademark side, you go to uspto.gov. uspto.gov is the website where you file patents and trademarks. And while I'm on that, Monique, one of the biggest issues I see with a lot of entrepreneurs, not just influencers, is that they launch brands without making sure that the name is available, or they come up with a very, very generic brand. And what happens is when they meet with me, I have to tell them that you can't use that name. Like, they've already got the website, they've already invested in all kind of stuff, and then they got to stop using it. And so I always tell people, go to the U.S. Trademark Office website and search the name and make sure that the name is available before you invest too much of your time and effort into building a brand, because that's the last thing you need, is get hit with a cease and desist letter because you didn't know that somebody had already had it registered. So very, very important thing to do.
Yes, I definitely agree. And Bobby, you mentioned earlier that Amazon has some protection in place for some of the brands. I want to also talk about the fact that people are putting this content on social media. So social media platforms often have their own terms and conditions. So what legal implications should entrepreneurs be aware of when they're using these platforms to promote their brand and engage with their audiences?
Yeah, no, I think it's important that you understand that what the original intent of these platforms are. These are social media websites. They're not intended to police content, and they've tried to get better at it, but that's just not what they do. So I always tell folks to really understand what you have first, and then take care of that in terms of registration or whatever. And that'll put you in a better position to get content taken down and all of that jazz. But they can't really do anything for you if you don't do anything for yourself first.
Yeah, definitely. And going back to contracts a little bit. So for entrepreneurs, what elements should they include in their contracts when they're collaborating with influencers or other businesses to ensure that both parties are protected?
Yeah, so you got some of the IP ownership piece is going to be really important, right? So depending on if you're a brand, some brands are okay with, the influencer owning it and some aren't. So you really got to understand who's going to own that.
Mm-hmm.
Also, if, for example, if a brand gets a letter from the FTC because you didn't disclose properly, who's liable for that? The other thing too is to think about, if an influencer posts something on their page and it's right next to your content, do you have the right to ask them to take it down? Um,
Mm-hmm.
that particular provision is called what we know as a morals clause. So athletes have this in their contracts. A lot of entertainers, so you'll see it a lot. Like if an athlete says something controversial or does something controversial, they may just get cut from the team or they may get fired. A lot of that is because of a morals clause in their contract that basically says if you do certain types of behavior, we have the right to terminate the contract. And so you'll also see that in influencer marketing contracts also. So if an influencer does something, a brand may have the right to terminate the contract. So you may want to understand if you do have a morals clause, like what you can and cannot do. You may not even be able to talk about Black Lives Matter or some other political cause. And if you do, they can terminate, right? So you got to really understand what that provision may entail. And of course, you have a lot of your standard provisions around payment and insurance and termination and things of that nature. So all of it's important, but some things may be more important than others, depending on just kind of where you are.
Good to know. And so we're all about making sure that people can prevent getting into these situations. If you've given us a lot of information, so could you share a case where this lack of attention to legal aspects resulted in a brand facing some legal challenges?
Yeah, I can talk about it from two perspectives. So the first perspective, I work for a big brick brand. It's a retail brand, and they did a really big drop on one of their spring collection lines. And they hired over 1,000 influencers for this campaign. And and this was way before they got me, they came to me after the fact. But the issue then became their contracts had the influencer owning the content, and that's not what they wanted. So it became an issue because when you got that many influencers, they're using the content however they wanted to, and the brand really couldn't control it. And it was a mess. After a while, most of them agreed to give the brand the ownership because they wanted to continue to work with this brand because it was a really, really big brand and the brand was paying well. So that was a lesson on making sure your contracts are what you want them to be.
Right.
And then the other ones was on the influencer side. You may have heard of a term like white labeling, where a brand will basically run your page and post content to your page as if it's you. There was an incident where a brand locked the influencer out of their page. And that's very, very rare. I haven't seen it happen, and this was a one-time thing that I saw happen, but it was pretty messy. This influencer had over 500,000 followers, really good brand, and got locked out. And so, but the contract wasn't very clear around how that happened. The brand claimed it was an accident. We don't believe it was that. But nevertheless, it was a scary time because she had built this community and all of that. So just being careful about who you give access to, your account and all of that. So I don't see brands doing that as much, but I do remember at one point that was a very popular thing so that they feel like they had more control and can see the analytics on those various posts.
Those are some great examples because, like you said, it doesn't happen often, but it could happen. So again, we're about preventing things from happening. So making sure that we're protected in the Black to Business community.
Love it.
Bobby, this has been amazing. So you've given us a lot. And I feel like I had to ask the questions had to be right because I don't speak to attorneys often. I'm like, I got to make sure my audience gets what that means. So you probably were like, these questions are great. But
they're great questions. I love it.
Yes. So for those who are listening, who are interested in your expertise, can you talk about the services that you offer to entrepreneurs and influencers and how they can connect with you for that support?
Yeah, most definitely. So a lot of my services involve a couple of things. So I offer services where I could review your contracts and file your trademarks and negotiate deals and things of that nature. And of course, I know brands know me, I know agencies. So sometimes it's also the connection that you need. So that stuff is pretty easy. And then I do offer some courses. So I do recognize some influencers can't afford my services, or entrepreneurs can't afford it right now. So I do have some DIY courses, like if they want to try to file their own trademark or if they want to try to file their own business entity. I have courses where I teach you how to do it on your own, without having to spend money on somebody like myself. I post a lot of educational content, mainly on my IG. I'm kind of finicky with TikTok. I'm in and out of TikTok. But if you go to I am Bobby Robinson on Instagram, that's mainly where I hang out. I am Bobby Robinson. And then I'm at the influencer attorney over on TikTok.
Awesome. And Bobby, are there any particular types of businesses that you work with, or just any type of business?
Yeah, I mainly work with creative entrepreneurs again. And when I say service-based businesses, athletes, entertainers. So yeah, it's very few businesses I don't work with. Like there's some in healthcare, I don't do a lot of, or certain types of therapists. So if it gets into like healthcare related areas, I tend to refer them to other lawyers. And of course, I don't do real estate and stuff like that. But of course, people will come to me anyway, just because like he's a lawyer, he probably knows somebody. And then I do. So if I don't do it, I'm happy to make a referral to someone that does.
Awesome. And Bobby, for you as a leader and business owner, are there any tools or resources that you use that help you stay organized?
Yeah, most definitely. I'm like all the way organized, right? So, so yeah, whether it be Dubsado to handle like my day-to-day kind of business management stuff, Asana boards to stay organized, you name it, Slack, for communication with me and my team. So there are several platforms that we use. I probably am missing some, but yeah.
Sound good. We'll put those in the show notes. And then we have a lot of people who are new to business or they're just getting started. What advice would you give them?
I think going back to my biggest advice is just know your why and the impact that you want to have, because there's a lot of distractions around what you cannot do and why you can't do it. So I always tell folks commit to that one vision and block out the noise when it comes to the rest of it.
Love it. And for you, what has been the best risk that you've taken?
I'd say going to law school because I really didn't have to, but I did, and it's definitely has been a blessing. So it's just another way for me to help serve my community when it comes to
Yes.
entrepreneurship, because it's not a lot of Black lawyers that do corporate or IP work. Most of them do other domestic practices like personal injury and family law, which are all needed, but we don't necessarily see a lot of Black lawyers doing business or IP.
Yes. Well, we're glad you went to law school too, because that's why you're here today.
Thank you.
You're welcome. And now into a round of not so serious business, a couple of fun questions.
Yeah.
Which TV show do you wish still aired?
Oh, it got to be Martin.
Listen, okay, you're good. Martin is so underrated. Yes.
No, yeah, it got to be Martin for sure.
Martin is good. That's a good pick. Okay. And what's the most random social media account you follow?
Oh man, that's a good one. I don't know. That's a good one. That's a good one. Most of my stuff I follow though is like sports.
Okay.
I'm a believer, so I'm following pastors and
Hmm.
different things like that. But yeah, I don't know. That's a good one. I'm gonna have to stroll and see. Every
Okay.
now and
Well,
then, some type of shady page will pop up.
okay.
But yeah,
It's in the algorithm. It's the
it's
algorithm.
an algorithm. Yeah, it's an algorithm.
Yes. If your business had a theme song that played every time you entered the room, what would that song be and why?
Oh, Meek Mill's Champions for me, you know.
Okay.
You know.
That's a good song. That's a good choice.
Yeah, 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 yeah. Or some type of Rick Ross or Jay-Z, ain't no telling. But yeah,
Okay.
yeah,
Rick Ross
yeah,
for sure. Love
yeah.
it. And finally, what does it mean to you to be Black in business?
It means legacy for me. I mean, when you think about the history of our culture and just
Hmm.
how all the Black Wall Streets and how creative we are and how innovative we are, and just to be a part of that and to carry that legacy and to keep that thing going is such a blessing. So that's why I just love what you and I both are doing and your listeners, just to keep pushing the envelope. And that's what I
Hmm.
love the most.
Good. Love that. And you mentioned your Instagram, so people are going to want to know how can they find you, connect with you, and support you. So if you could share.
Yeah, it's I am Bobby Robinson. That's I am Bobby Robinson. And love to hear from y'all.
Love it. Bobby, thank you so much for all that you've poured into myself and also my audience. This has been such a great conversation, and thank you for the work that you're doing. So thank you for being on the show.
Thanks for having me, and I appreciate you too.
And that's a wrap. Shout out to Bobby for such an insightful conversation and so much value. As I mentioned earlier during our conversation with Bobby, I felt like the questions were so formal and so technical, but that's because, like I said, I don't get to talk to attorneys often, and I had to make sure that you got what you needed. So I love that we were able to dive into the evolving influencer landscape. We learned how to approach influence as a business and uncover those often overlooked aspects that entrepreneurs should consider in this space. We also dived into the vital realm of brand protection, from safeguarding your intellectual property to establishing clear expectations and collaborations. Such good stuff. So as you continue on your entrepreneurial path, remember the insights that were shared today. Your brand is not just a name, it's a legacy in the making. And as always, for more information on Bobby and the valuable resources that he mentioned, please visit blacktobusiness.com/165. Thank you so much for tuning in and being a part of the Black to Business family. Stay inspired, stay ambitious, and stay tuned for more empowering conversations. I will chat with you next week, same time, same place.